Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Tracy Cook, and I'm with Saks Healthcare Communications. I'd like to show our audience today how you can send questions throughout the webinar. Our speakers will try and answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. Please use the questions box to type your questions. You can also download the handout today in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ben Davies. Ben is currently the Executive Director of GEDSA. He is a medical device engineer who was previously the head of engineering and product development at NeoMed, a part of the Avanos families of companies. Ben has been involved in ISO 80369 standard since 2012 and an active member since GEDSA was formalized in 2013. Recently, he served as GEDSA's interim chairman and acting vice president of the board of directors. Ben has also served on multiple committees within GEDSA and has contributed to multiple studies. He has served as a member representative on GEDSA's Clinical Advisory Board. Ben, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy, for that kind introduction. The title of our webinar today is Improving Enteral Safety with ENFit Connectivity. Speaking on this critical topic are two leading experts and colleagues, Gail Gewertz and Kim Pollard. Gail Gewertz is from the greater Chicago area and has been a registered dietitian since 1987. She earned her Master of Science degree from the University of Florida. Dedicated to improving nutrition, Gail is experienced with nutrition support, patient consultation, parenteral and enteral nutrition, medical sales and marketing, as well as sales training. She's been awarded for many dietitian sales and marketing awards in her career, and she's also been a GEDSA member since it formalized in 2013. I think here it says 12 because we were working on this before it was even formalized into an organization. In just a moment, I'll just elaborate real quickly. GEDSA stands for the Global Enteral Device Suppliers Association. So it's a nonprofit trade association that was put together to help usher along these international standards and advance these patient safety initiatives. Our other speaker today is Kim Pollard. Kim Pollard is currently advisor of quality and safety at City of Hope in Chicago. She has a dual board certifications as a certified nutrition support clinician and nurse executive board certified. Kim was awarded her American Society of Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition Fellowship in 2022. In 2017, she successfully implemented ENFit at City of Hope, Chicago, which is formerly Cancer Treatment Centers of America, and assisted in other hospitals with their implementation processes. She's an active member of the Aspen Nurses section, Aspen Oncology section, and a member of GEDSA's Clinical Advisory Board. She has given several webinars and presentations on ENFit implementation and usage. And with that, we'll make our speaker disclosures, which neither of our speakers has any disclosures to make. Today's presentation has been approved for an hour of contact hours for continuing education, both nursing and dietitian. At the end of this webinar, you can obtain those continuing education credits. The URL will be provided at the conclusion of the webinar. And the accreditation statement you can see there is below. And then this activity is sponsored, it's been supported by educational grant from Dale Medical Products. We appreciate that. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Gail and Kim.
And Gail, just make sure thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Excited to be here, excited that you folks have joined us. We realize there may be some ENFit experts on listening in or folks that are new to ENFit. We will try and cover all aspects of ENFit between Kim, myself, and any questions and answers. Again, the title is Improving Enteral Safety with ENFit Connectivity. For the most part, I will be doing the background on ENFit, and Kim will be doing the implementation process that she's been experienced with and speaks on. So we have 3 learning objectives that are listed here, and we plan on accomplishing this within the next hour. We want you to understand and be able to list 3 advantages of implementing ENFit in a timely manner and describe a successful implementation, as well as be able to discuss any challenges to implementation and strategies to overcome these difficulties. I apologize for that. We're back where we should be. A successful implementation outline is listed here, and most of these topics, if not all, will be discussed by Kim. And then the lessons learned will also be presented by Kim, but certainly Kim and I could work together to answer any additional questions or challenges you may have had or experienced.
All right, thank you, Gail, for the overview of what we'll be discussing today. Before we get into the material, we'd like to establish a baseline of knowledge among our participants with our first poll question here. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you rate your knowledge and confidence with Enteral devices and ENFit? And we'll give you all about 20 or 30 seconds to answer that, and then we'll take a look at the results.
Great, and a reminder, just vote directly on the screen. Ben will just give it just another second and I'll share the results.
Okay, well, very interesting. I appreciate everyone's responses, and we're going to circle back to the same question essentially at the end of the presentation day, and we'll hope that the percentages of excellent, good, and very good go up. And with that, we'll go back to Gail.
Thank you very much for participating in that survey and for passing it back, Ben. Recognizing that there is some limited knowledge, I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we are talking about the entire enteral feeding system. And I know we may have a variety of clinicians on the phone. However, I know that some clinicians focus on different areas of the enteral feeding system. However, we will be talking on this presentation about the administration sets, syringes, feeding tubes, and pharmacy and accessory items. So what I'd like to describe quickly here, if you see my arrow, there is a connection between any pre-mixed nutrient that may be on the market. This is a different standard. This is not ENFit. So if anybody has switched to a pre-mixed container, it does not mean you necessarily switched to ENFit. So ENFit is down by the feeding tube. Any device that connects to the feeding tube would be an ENFit device that we are looking for the conversion to. Some hospitals, even those with limited knowledge, you may already be using ENFit. Maybe your nursing staff or clinical dietetic staff switch to it. You may not be aware of that, but you can certainly find out by understanding that the connectivity is more of a twisting connection versus the step connector, which I'll show you in a few slides. So what is ENFit? The biggest goal for developing ENFit is to minimize the risk of misconnections. The lure connector has been around for many, many years and has been very versatile. But at the same time, when it's versatile, it means it can connect to almost any type of medical device, and therefore causing a risk of a misconnection or delivery of the wrong fluid into the wrong line. And this could have fatal to pretty severe outcome for the patient. This is ENFit is for the enteral feeding system only. ISO 80369-3 is part of the ISO 80369 series. For those of you who are not familiar with ISO, it stands for International Safety Standard Organization. It's used multiple times. You may have seen it in some food service areas, in chemistry labs, and other places. So it's not uncommon. It is a global device consistency. It's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended because it does provide for optimal safety for the end user and or patient. Please understand that ENFit is not a brand to any company. It is a brand to GETSA, the Global Enteral Device Suppliers Association that Ben described earlier. So you may see it on products, but it's not doesn't represent a company. It represents GETSA's product, and there's consistency and a tie-in, and it complies with ISO 80369-3. So you may be asking yourself, so how common are tubing misconnections? Maybe your facility hasn't had many that you may be aware of. And there was a study done here. I think this one is back in 2006. However, if you even Google or go to Medscape or PubMed and look for enteral misconnections, there's numerous studies and publications describing tubing misconnections. In this study specifically, it describes that hospitals responded to a survey from Aspen that stated that around almost 16% of their institution had enteral misconnection incidences. 57 or almost 60% reported negatively, meaning they claim they did not have any issues. And then we have 26% that said they did not know. So we do know there's a problem here. And we have one more study that I wanted to share with you. And this was in 2010. And it's recognized that although the problem is high, the outcome for a misconnection can be fatal. In this study here, it was 18% or 21 patients died. 95%, I'm sorry, 95 survived. 82% had complications. And these complications are listed here and are pretty significant. So the goal with developing ENFit was to develop a device that's at the end of the feeding tube. It does not describe the entire feeding tube, that could minimize and hopefully eliminate any misconnections. In this picture here, I want people to understand there was a lot of thought that went into developing the ENFit device. As you can see, and Ben's an engineer and he's very good at this, but we just want to be able to share with you all the dimensions that went into developing the ENFit device, which is almost like a reverse lure for those who are experienced with reverse lure twist, lure lock, excuse me, which nursing may be familiar with, and maybe some other clinicians as well. This product, GETSA was formed in 2014, as Ben described. We started out in 2012 working on this, and we sat through multiple meetings and with multiple engineers, regulatory, to develop this product. Europe has a complete conversion. The US has a majority of facilities have converted. So we strongly encourage you to check with your facility to see if they have converted, and if they haven't, to raise awareness of ENFit and move towards switching towards ENFit. And Kim will describe that process in a few slides. And then since ENFit was launched, there's not been a report of a single misconnection with an ENFit product. So the FDA, where do they stand on all of this? And other regulatory agencies such as the Joint Commission, the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, they all support the ISO 80369-3 standard. So they certainly support it and encourage the conversion. At the same time, we want you to work closely with your team that Kim will describe on the conversion process to make sure it's a safe conversion when switching out product. So the next question could come to mind is, okay, so how do tubing misconnections happen? And we would think with all the educated clinicians that the risk of this shouldn't be high, and you may not even be aware of any of it in your facility. It may be underreported, But the first one here is patients on multiple devices. This you can find in your ICU and most probably in your NICU, where there's multiple lines and it could be dark in there and or low lighting, and a clinician could just inadvertently connect the wrong set with the wrong tube in the patient. And there's other reasons. They could be under time pressure. Human error plays a role, as well as there's a lot of rotating nursing staff, changes over with nursing, and unintended use of the tubes. So we have been able to identify why these misconnections happen and realize the best way to minimize this is to fix the tubing so a tubing misconnection is minimized and can't happen. With that said, I want to make you aware that there is a video both on stayconnected.org. Kim will have that for you in one of the later slides, or as well as on YouTube on Tracy's story. I'm sorry, Trisha's story. So there's a few folks speaking on loved ones that have been lost as a result of tubing misconnections. And when you start to relate these numbers back to an actual human and the effect it's had on their fellow family members or caretakers, then this really becomes a reality and something that may encourage you to move towards ENFit more efficiently. One of the other advantages, and especially speaking as a dietitian, it's recognized that patients on feeding tubes may not get what's actually prescribed for multiple reasons. And one of those reasons is the feeding set could slip out of the feeding tube. There is no alarm on the pump for that. All that will do is quote unquote feed the bed or put formula into the bed. So since ENFit has a secure connection, the risk of feeding the bed is decreased substantially and increases the chance of the patient receiving their prescribed nutrient requirement. What I have here is a feeding set. Some of you may be familiar with it. This end is where we have what they call the step connector. It's also been called the Christmas tree connector, and that goes into the feeding tube. That is what we're replacing with ENFit. Now, initially, I think it was around 2016, we came out with, I shouldn't say we, there were companies that came out with the ENFit connector with the transition connector attached. The transition connector looks exactly like the Christmas tree connector, but can be twisted off. So for the most part, every set or feeding set that you probably have in your hospital does have an ENFit connector, but it may look like this, the Christmas tree, but you would just have to twist it off for the ENFit. However, as time has progressed, some of the manufacturers are eliminating the transition connector and just providing ENFit connectors. And that's where the concern comes that we want to make sure you folks are aware of ENFit and can switch to that promptly. This side here is what goes into the premix container. This is actually called an N+. It's a different ISO standard. It was launched a while ago, and it has a almost like a 3D cross and goes into the ready-to-hang container. This is not part of the ENFit conversion. ENFit is all about the connections to the feeding tube. Here are the types of administration sets. You folks may already be familiar with this, but here we have about 2 bags with pre-attached sets. On the right side, it has just the ENFit at the end. And on the left side, it has ENFit underneath the step connector, which is the transition connector, which may no longer be coming with these bags anymore in order to encourage facilities to switch to ENFit promptly. But beyond a bag with a set, you could have a spike set. That would just spike a bag and attach to the patient. Those spike sets, as I mentioned, is a different ISO standard to connect to the bag, but at the end or distal end is the area that connects to the feeding tube, and that's ENFit. The bag pump sets is pictured to the right. Gravity feeding sets, you wouldn't have a pump, but basically would be the same as the sets to the right, but just wouldn't have a cartridge to connect into a pump. Extension sets, this can mean a couple of things. An extension set could make these sets longer. As we saw during COVID, there were patients in the ICU that were receiving tube feedings, but the pump was outside of the patient's area. And this required an extension set added to the feeding set to make it longer to keep the pump outside of the patient area. The other extension set is what you may be familiar with is called a button tube. And it basically looks like a button feeding tube on patients. We primarily see that on pediatrics or long-term tube feeding patients. The attachment for these extension sets to the button is not affected by ENFit. That's a proprietary connection, but the end that connects to the feeding set does have the ENFit device on it, and it is a male ENFit device. And there's other bolus feeding devices, and that would be, call it a feeding syringe, that would also be an ENFit device. I mentioned earlier about the transition connector, and here's a close-up photo of it. This part would connect to the ENFit, and this part would go into a feeding tube that does not have an ENFit on it, and we call that a funnel tube. Was on all of the administration sets, but we're starting to see that being discontinued, again, to encourage hospitals, healthcare, and other, home care and other healthcare facilities switch over to ENFit. Now, on the bottom here, it's written pretty small, but it does mention legacy. And it's mentioned here in the first bullet. Legacy feeding tubes really refer to the non-ENFit feeding tubes and is a term that's used in the industry. And I just wanted to make sure you're familiar with it. But the goal here is to convert from a legacy feeding set to an ENFit feeding set. Here are the types of administration sets that could be attached to the button tube. Here's a section that would be attached to the button on the patient's stomach. And here is a funnel, and here is the ENFit. In addition, feeding syringes. There's many feeding syringes out there. You may be familiar with the oral syringe, which looks somewhat like a lure slip or a tip that would go into the patient's mouth or oral consumption. So these are ENFit syringes here. I'm sorry, some of these are IV syringes, but we do have ENFit syringes that would replace the oral syringes and can be used for patients with an ENFit device. One of the real important features here that I want to describe is that when patients are on a feeding tube, they most likely need their medications to be administered through their feeding tube. And with that said, they will need syringes and they will need to speak to their pharmacist, especially if they're at home. They'll need to speak to the retail pharmacist and let them know that they have an ENFit feeding tube and they need an ENFit syringe. And that's a real important point to make sure they do get the medication and the right medication. Not all medications are indicated for tube feedings. So we have two types. Actually, there's probably more than two types, but this is a distinguishing two types. So for infants, if they're getting a low dose of a medication, we want to make sure they get every last drop because they require such a small quantity. So we have a low dose ENFit syringe, and we also have a standard ENFit tip syringe. This could also be used for oral intake. And notice we have like one thread here. Some ENFit syringes may have more than one, but either works well. So when I became part of GETSA and when I got involved with enteral nutrition in the beginning of my career, it appeared anytime I walked into pharmacy to talk to them about enterals, they would say, no, you got to speak to the clinical nutrition team and to nursing about the devices. And that's what I would do. However, once becoming part of GETSA and learning a lot about ENFit and the challenges, it opened up my eyes to realize that pharmacy is correct. Maybe the nutrient is with the clinical nutrition team. Maybe the devices are with the nursing team or materials management. However, the patient does need their medications. And so we know that there are products, what we call the legacy product, remember that's the non-ENFit, that can help the pharmacist uh, pull up the medication. These legacy products are now available as ENFit products. So we need to make sure that the pharmacist is aware that these exist so they can get products into the ENFit device. So this is my last slide. It's been a delight talking with you folks, and I greatly appreciate your attendance, but we're not over yet. I just want to emphasize that switching to ENFit is now. The ENFit connectors out there, we're going to start seeing supply chain moving more and more towards ENFit and decreasing the legacy. So the time is now to switch to ENFit. And with that, I know there's a polling question, so I'm going to turn this over to Tracy and Ben, but Kim is excellent at the implementation process, and she'll be speaking next.
Thank you so much for that, Gail. Now that Gail has described to us the components of the enteral feeding system and what distinguishes ENFit from legacy, and discussed what a tubing misconnection is, we would like to ask this poll question to help to hopefully determine if a misconnection has occurred within your facility. So, are you aware of a tubing misconnection having occurred at your facility or at a previous facility? Please select one, yes or no. We'll give this 15, 20 seconds or so, and then Tracy will share the results. Okay, wow, that is staggeringly high, and it's unfortunate. We're hoping in the future state of things that this percentage of yes goes significantly down with the implementation of ENFit, but I appreciate your responses. And with that, we'll switch over to Kim.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Gail. As Ben had said, I am Kim Pollard, and I led the ENFit implementation at City of Hope, Chicago, formerly known as Cancer Treatment Centers of America, back in November of 2017. And I will be discussing ENFit implementation with you. And I just wanted to point out with this slide that GEDSA has some great resources to get you started on stayconnected.org. Gonna make it so I can advance the slides. There we go. Okay, so when you are developing your plan to begin ENFit, there is more to do than just ordering a product. You need to figure out who needs to be involved and which areas this change will affect. Starting with your core team, you will need a physician who places the feeding tubes, like a GI physician, a surgeon, an IR physician. You will need nurses and dietitians and anyone else who handles core coordination and patient education related to enteral nutrition. You will need a representative from materials management or supply chain, as well as someone from administration or leadership to help you move the project along. Pharmacy is another area that ENFit affects. However, in my implementation, I did not utilize pharmacy. Since our hospital's patient population is all adults, we didn't need to include them since there would have been no impact. For those of you that only take care of kids, when an adult has a medication, you're going to mix it with 20 milliliters to 30 milliliters of water and give it anyways. So you can just do that with a bolus syringe. It makes it a little easier. If you are a pediatric hospital, then you will definitely need pharmacy on the team. So next, you need to find out what supplies are available. What supplies does your patient population need? Do they need syringes for bolus feeds or gravity bags? Do they need adapters if they're traveling outside of the area? When we went through our transition, ENFit was brand new. Not all manufacturers had ENFit supplies or even knew what ENFit was. So next, you need to ask yourself, how are your patients currently receiving their supplies? Do they use a DME provider? Do they use a pharmacy? Maybe they use an enteral nutrition company that supplies the DME and formulas to them. Or does your facility have its own dispensing process similar to how the VA works? That's something that you got to take into account. For our implementation, we had to utilize a national enteral provider to supply both the formula and supplies to our patients. Our patients traveled from all over the U.S. to come to our facility, so we need to make sure that they're getting the same great care at home as we were providing to them when they were on site. During our implementation and planning, I worked closely with two of the big national enteral companies to make sure that their go live and their start of using ENFit coordinated with ours. If for some reason the patient that was going to be getting an ENFit tube did not want to use one of those national companies and wanted to use, a little local mom and pop place, that's totally fine. It is always up to the patient who they want to get their supplies from. In those situations, I would just have to call that company and say, hey, what type of supplies do you have? This is what we want for our patients. Can you accommodate them? Unfortunately, during those first couple of years of ENFit, a lot of companies couldn't accommodate them. So when that would happen, I'd have to talk to the patient and I'd have to give them their two options. One, they can stick with ENFit and go with a different company that is able to get them the ENFit supplies and the stuff that they need, or they would have to have used the legacy tube and then they could have gone with that company that they originally chose. The majority of the patients did choose to go with the ENFit and find a different company because they were just amazed at how easy it is to use an ENFit tube compared to a legacy tube, in addition to the safety aspect. Luckily today, most enteral and DME companies can accommodate ENFit, so that should make your guys' transition a whole lot easier. So now we know who to include, we know what supplies we want to use, and we know how to get the supplies to our patients. But how do we get these supplies into our hospital? This is where materials management or supply chain come in and are instrumental. They can help your implementation team navigate through the various contracts that your hospital has, and they can figure out, which company you should order from. They can tell you to order your supplies and your tubes from company A instead of company B because of some pre-existing contracts, and it'll make the transition a lot more cost efficient and easier. Nobody likes spending money if they don't have to. So if you can get the better deal, you get the better deal. Make sure when those new supplies arrive that you keep them under lock and key until the go live date. There is nothing more frustrating when that new product is accidentally used and nobody's ready for it. So put a big red bow on it, a do not use sign, something on the ENFit supplies until you guys are ready to go live. You probably will have your supplies available a little bit before you're ready to go live. That way everything is there. Okay, next slide. Did it. So next is on education. So educating all employees is crucial to a good implementation. There's nothing worse than rolling out a new product or device or service and the people that need to know about it have no clue. So you start by educating the key staff first. These staff are those that will be directly working with ENFit tubes. These may be some of the same people on your implementation teams as well as their direct colleagues. These are going to be your champions of ENFit. They need to know why ENFit is being used versus legacy. They need to understand the safety aspect of ENFit. They need to be able to recognize ENFit tubes and not just go by the color of the end pieces. Some people, unfortunately, still think ENFit is purple. Well, a lot of legacy style tubes do have white connectors that are purple, so please do not rely on just the color. These ENFit champions also need to be able to troubleshoot any issues that occur, such as a clogged tube, a broken tube, or even supply issues. After the key staff are comfortable, then you can roll out education to the rest of your staff. You can do this by having large department meetings or grand rounds. You can do one-on-one education sessions with hands-on demo in the actual nursing unit, kind of a roll up with your cart and talk to people when they have time. It allows the nurses the ability to get a hands-on demo, but not get pulled away from their patients. We know how valuable their time is. You can also make an online learning module for people to view. Personally, I did all of that. I talked and taught ENFit as much as I could until everyone was sick of me. I would be doing my ENFit education rounds, and before I could even say something to the person that I was walking up to, they'd be like, I'm good with ENFit. I talked to you yesterday. I have no problems. My goal was for every employee that would touch ENFit to be as well versed in it as I was. And I think I succeeded in that goal. But what about new employees? So most facilities have new employees every few months. It's a normal turnover in just about every industry. So you'll need to formulate a plan for those new hires to also be educated on ENFit and how to use it. Some hospitals will cover that education with preceptors. We chose initially to include it in our care provider orientation. I was already teaching during that orientation, so it was easy for me to add that into my section that I was already teaching. Over the past couple years, we have transitioned it back into the new hire education with the preceptors. Once all the education is completed, or planned in the case of new hires, then you can move on to the next step, which is your go live day. Make sure that the go live day is well communicated, make sure all the supplies are ready, and make sure all the outside companies are ready to assist with the care of our patients. On the go live day, make sure to have a champion or key staff member available for any questions that may arise. This should be somebody very comfortable with ENFit and comfortable with teaching. Personally, I followed the patient from the procedure room to the inpatient unit or to when the patient received their education in the outpatient setting. I made sure before every handoff to a new staff or stakeholder that was caring for the patient that they were comfortable with ENFit. If they had any questions or concerns prior to assuming care of the patient, I made sure that we addressed that. And I did this for the first, several tubes that were placed until everybody was comfortable. After that, I just made sure that my phone number was readily available to them and that they knew to call me if they had any questions or concerns. So next, patient education. What do they need to know? It was very important for me to make sure the patients had everything that they needed when they left us. I wanted to make sure there were no surprises for them. They had enough going on in their lives with just coming into terms with needing a feeding tube that they don't need to worry about supplies. I would give them a small care package with the bolus syringes, adapters, and gauze for them to use until they received their first delivery. I made sure they had printed instructions with step-by-step pictures of everything I would be teaching them. I would demonstrate a feed and a flush utilizing their tube, the one that is now in their stomachs. That way, they would know the sensation of what a tube feed feels like in a safe setting. Then I would have them demonstrate a feed and a flush. If they had any family members or caregivers with them that were going to be helping them at home, I would also have them demonstrate it. That way, everybody was taught the same way, the same thing, and everybody was comfortable with it. I would have them start slow with about 30 to 60 milliliters at a time and increase over the next few days to their goal. I would be able to do the first wound care to their insertion site and demonstrate to them on their tube how they should be cleaning the tube, the insertion site, and any other cares that they might need. I would give them a name and contact information for the company that would be providing them their supplies. I would make sure the company had their direct contact information. That way they could confirm their delivery address and when the patient would be home to get their supplies. Because you have to remember, our patients flew in from other states. So sometimes they would be with us for a couple of days. Sometimes they'd be going home that next day. So I didn't want their supplies sitting on their porch waiting for them or something happening to the delivery getting stolen off their porch. So I always made sure that they were connected with that company. I also made sure our patients had our 24-hour phone number to call for any issues at home. And our Enteral team's direct number for any questions that arise during just the regular business hours. I would also give them the legacy adapters. Now, this may seem odd, me providing them with adapters, but as I said before, many of our patients lived in areas outside of where our hospital was, and their local hospitals did not have ENFit. I did not want them to have something happen and them have to go to a local hospital, ending up being admitted and not being able to use their tube. So I showed them the adapters and had them put the adapters and a few extra of the bolus syringes in their go bag or in the glove box of their car or their wife's purse or however they wanted to do it, just so it was somewhere accessible to them if they needed it. I explained to them that my goal was for them to never have to use these items, but they're there in case of an emergency. Recently, we have phased out the adapters from our education and our DME orders since the majority of facilities now seem to have implemented ENFit. After my facility had transitioned to ENFit, we then assisted our sister hospitals in their transition. They were able to utilize a lot of the same products, educational resources and handouts that we had already created, so their implementation was a lot smoother than ours.
Thank you, Kim, for covering through some of the conversion processes with us. And with that, we would like to assess among the participants today where your institution is at with its ENFit conversion process. So if you would, please fill out the poll. Select one, either completely converted, partially converted / in the process of converting, in the planning stage, not currently scheduled, or I don't know. And we'll leave that open for a few moments, and then Tracy will share the results with us. All right, so about 15% confirmed as converted, 14% partially, and then we have others that are planning, but we have quite a few that are I don't know status. I would say that nationally in the US, we're probably, it's hard to assess, but best estimations are between a 55 or so, maybe 60% conversion rate. So I'm hoping a lot of these I don't knows are actually converted. That would align to what we best believe the national sort of average is or conversion rate is. And with that, we'll go back to Kim.
All right. So now we're going to talk about some of the lessons learned while implementing ENFit. So number one, ensure that education is out and understood way before your go live date, and make sure that hands-on options are available for those who will be working directly with it. Second, make sure all areas, your GI department, your surgery, your interventional radiology, wherever it is that these tubes are being placed, all go live at the same time. We initially staggered our go lives, and it caused a lot of confusion trying to figure out when we were getting supplies for patients, did they need legacy, did they need ENFit? So save yourself some heartache and just do it all at the same time. Next, make sure there is an ENFit champion available for staff to call when issues arise or if there's any concerns. And then always make sure you have more than one source for supplies. You never know when things are going to go on back order or when an outside company is going to change their insurance contracts or go out of business. So you never want your patients to be without their supplies. And then always have an emergency plan or a go bag with supplies ready at any given time. You never know when something's going to happen. You never know when you're going to have to, or a patient's going to have to call a family member to go grab their supplies because they're being, admitted at a hospital or, if you're on vacation. So it's very important to have that. Some other common issues that have been brought up are the caps on some of the brands of the ENFit tube end up cracking. These caps on the ENFit tubes do not need to be over tightened, just half a twist and they're nice and secure. It's a wonderful change than the old legacy tubes where things would leak and you really had to get them on tight. Number two, the connection threads sometimes can get dirty on the tubes. There are several commercially available ENFit cleaning devices. They're about $14 a piece, give or take, and they have great antimicrobial properties. They're designed specifically for cleaning ENFit tubes. But for some people, $14 for a little cleaning device can be expensive. It can, really make an impact on their finances. So luckily, a recent study by Kansas City Children's Hospital did show that using a good quality toothbrush can work just as well as the commercially available devices for cleaning the tubes. I always gave my patients the options and let them choose what they want to use. If they wanted the cleaning device, I would order that for them. If they wanted to use the toothbrush, I was fine with that too. Another common thing that gets brought up is for drainage tubes, NG Salem tubes. They're not going away. There are adapters that you can use on Salem sump tubes or decompression NG tubes to make it ENFit compatible so you can feed through it. However, Salem sumps are huge. Please be kind to your patients and get them a small bore nasal feeding tube if that's how they're going to need to feed. They're much more comfortable, and yes, I have had one, so I know what they feel like. The small bore is a lot more comfortable than having to use a Salem sump. Sometimes people will ask about medications and supplements being given through a tube. Obviously, if patients can still swallow and are able to swallow their medications, we do encourage that. That way they don't lose the use of the muscles in their throat and their neck and for swallowing. But yeah, you can give your medications via the feeding tube. We do highly recommend that patients speak with their pharmacist about being on a feeding tube and the wanting to give the medications through the tube. That way they can assist in letting you know, okay, this medication can go through the tube, this one can't. We'll help you call your doctor to get a different form of the medication or a different type of the medication. That way it can go through your tube. Normally I don't recommend naturopathic supplements going through tubes because they get very clunky and they seem to clog the tubes. So I usually don't recommend that unless it's something that's really, really specialized. We do have some patients who prefer to blenderize their own diets, and we do recommend that folks work with their nutrition team if they're wanting to do that. That way they can make sure they're getting the correct nutritional requirements with whatever it is that they're blenderizing. But there are tons of different types of commercially available enteral formulas out there. There's even vegan options available. And then when I implemented our ENFit process, I was just a regular nurse. I didn't have any special titles or anything like that. So if I can do it, you guys can do it. I promise you. Ben?
Thank you, Kim. So with that, that basically brings us through the planned content of the presentation, and we would like to basically sort of circle back on this question we asked initially to rate the participants' knowledge on how confident you are with Enteral devices and ENFit now that you've seen the material here. So if you would, please select one, either excellent, 2, very good, 3, good, 4, limited, or 5, no knowledge. And we'll give that just a moment or so more. Okay, very good. So when we asked this question at the beginning, we had 6% say excellent, so now we're up to 12. We had 18% say very good, we're now up to 30. And we had 24% say good, we're at 32. So we're trending in the right direction. So that's very encouraging to see that.
Thank you for your attention, and this concludes our presentation. Before we get to your questions, Ben will let everyone in the audience know how to receive your CE for attending this event.
Yes, thank you. So as mentioned at the beginning, this activity is approved for 1 contact hour. You can obtain these continuing education credits by logging on to www.saxtesting.com/P. That's www.saxtesting.com/P. You will need to register on the test site and complete the evaluation form. Upon successful submission, you will be able to print your certificate of completion. And for our dietitians, once you have completed the online CE process and have received a certificate, we will email you a CDR conforming certificate. And again, this activity is supported by an educational grant from Dale Medical Products. This webinar will also have an archived version that is available. You can go to www.perspectivesinnursing.org. That's www.perspectivesinnursing.org to access that. And this is also the on-demand version also has the CE credits available with it. And with that, we will get into the Q&A section of the presentation. So we've received a few questions throughout, and I think we will start with a question, and it says, and I think I'll toss this maybe to Kim first, and then Gail, please chime in as well too. The question is, are you going to discuss the RX Crush ENFit pill crusher? We are about to roll this out at our hospital. You guys, either you familiar with that product? Otherwise, I'm aware of it. I can speak a little to it.
I think my one comment for that would be that you would clearly need to check with your pharmacist and understand not all pills are crushable. Not all pills are intended to go through a G-tube. So there's a lot of caution that needs to be taken. Just because it's a pill doesn't mean it can go through a feeding tube. So I highly recommend getting your pharmacy involved. And Ben, I'll let you finish that up.
Yeah, so for those unfamiliar, RX Crush is a product. It's essentially almost like a Ziploc pouch. So it closes with like a Ziploc seal on one end, and then it has an ENFit connector at the other. And so what the product allows you to do is to put a pill in the pouch, and then there's a sort of a crushing wheel assembly like mechanism that comes with it that you roll over the pouch, and it crushes the pill into a really fine powder. And then you can connect an ENFit syringe to the connector that's on the pouch, the ENFit connector, and you can withdraw the crushed contents. But as Gail said, caution should be exercised with that. I like to mention that as well, because there are like time release medications and medications that really shouldn't be crushed, because then you compromise the time release factor, or you can end up in a bad situation. So please seek advisement from your pharmacist before doing that.
And one other thing, please do not mix medications together when you're crushing them, administering them at the same time. Some people think that is a way of, speeding up the MedPass process. That's not okay. Very few medications are compatible to be crushed and administered together. So unfortunately, it is best to administer them one at a time.
Thank you. And hopefully we answered what you were looking for in that question. Another one that we have is, how do we prepare for an ENFit enteral patient's discharge to ensure they receive ENFit devices by their home infusion company? Gail, do you want to maybe start on that one?
Sure. And I know there are home infusion companies out there that have ENFit and converted to ENFit. There are others that are in the process, kind of similar to the survey answers we saw during this presentation. I would strongly encourage that you be in contact with your discharge planner when implementing ENFit and have them understand which home infusion companies or dealers or how the patient can get access to the ENFit products. And Kim, you may have more experience with this from a hands-on perspective.
Yeah, our big thing that we did is we made sure the actual DME orders that we sent to those different companies specifically said ENFit on them. Every once in a blue moon, you'll get someone that doesn't have ENFit tube and they want to stay with it. So then we would have to be very specific on those discharge instructions too, and orders where it would say ENFit or non-ENFit supplies. That's how we did it.
Very good. The next question we have is, what suggestions do you have for an ENFit enteral patient that is traveling and may need to visit the hospital while they're out of town, but this facility has not converted to ENFit? I think we started with Gail last time. Kim, you want to maybe take this one?
Yeah, I can. We've run into this a few times. So it all depends on the situation. So if the patient is, say, on vacation with friends and family and they end up admitted somewhere and they have none of their supplies with them for whatever reason, say they are using syringe bolus feeds, because that's how the majority of our patients used it. While they're in the hospital, they can switch to the pump and they can use those administration bags that Gail had showed that have that little stepped connector on it, and they can use that. There have been times where I have overnight mailed bolus syringes to patients because they had like one left and they weren't sure what to do with it, and they, you know, needed more and they were stuck because their plane got delayed or whatever. But yeah, that's why it's important to have that go bag of supplies with you just in case.
Good. Gail, do you have anything to add to that?
I think Kim's answer was spot on, but just in addition, it's also nice if you're going to be traveling to understand the healthcare systems there. Maybe if you're working with a home infusion company or a dealer and they're located in that area, inform them that you're going there, and maybe they can help you out with supplies. And also you can contact the hospitals in that area to understand which ones have ENFit before. So kind of planning before can also be helpful.
Very good. And I'll add too that ultimately, once ENFit conversion has reached a high percentage here in the U.S., like it has in Europe, that these issues of patient portability are largely eliminated or completely reduced down to nothing, because even with legacy systems, there are nuances. There's no international standardization for legacy systems. So any manufacturer that has a legacy product is really to their design, their specification. It's not following an international standard. So there's compatibility among them, but there's not standardized compatibility. So some work better with others than, you know, like a manufacturer's system that they make the syringe and they make the feeding tube works pretty good together. But if you start mixing and matching manufacturer A and B and C with legacy systems, you can have things that don't work so well together. With ENFit, since it follows an international standard, you actually reduce or you take that away, because everything's following the same very precise standard, and patient portability increases, or the problems associated with it largely go away once you hit a high level of conversion. And then moving to, we have one more question, and I think we have just enough time maybe for this one. It says, can you talk about the suppliers, I'm sorry, they worded this way. Can you talk about the supply chain barriers when choosing products for nursing without making enemies or becoming annoying? Gail's smiling. I don't know if you want to take that one, or Kim, if you want to chime in first.
Sometimes when you become an advocate for a product or for a patient, we can come across as annoying. And sometimes that is a way to achieve a goal. However, I think being nice is best. From a supply chain perspective, most of the distributors out there, the large medical distributors out there, do have ENFit. Some are manufactured by them, some are ordered through their distributors. So I would highly recommend working with your distributor. If you're not using a distributor, make sure that your manufacturer knows that you're switching to ENFit, and submit what we would call a forecast, that you're going to discontinue the legacy products as we described it, and you're going to increase uses of ENFit. And this way, they'll be able to manufacture products and be able to supply you adequately.
Very good. And that gets us through the questions that have been asked. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for their participation today. I'd like to thank our presenters, Kim and Gail. And with that, I will turn it over to Tracy for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks to both our speakers. We'd also like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Immediately upon the conclusion of this webinar, you'll be presented with an online survey. Please keep your web browser open, and we appreciate your feedback. In 1 hour following the conclusion of this webinar, you'll receive an email with instructions and this link to obtain your CE credits. That's www.saxtesting.com/P. And we'd also just like to thank everyone for attending today's session. If you'd like to get in touch with GEDSA, you can contact them at stayconnected.org or email them at info@gedsa.org. And on that, that is the end of the session. We hope everyone has a great rest of your day.